Steve Galster heads the Freeland Foundation. Their mandate to hunt down animal traffickers brought him to Bangkok a decade ago. Today he has a new target: the brutal sex trafficking rings that use Thailand as their base.
Sex trafficking is modern-day slavery. The issue is, once you are in a situation that you want to get out of and you can't, you lose your free will, you're a slave. There's about 1.5 million sex slaves in the world today. About half of those are in Asia, and a lot of them are right here in Thailand.
One of the country's most notorious rings is run by Uzbeks. They lure women from their impoverished country with the promise of a legitimate job. Then they force them onto the street. Tonight, Galster is heading for a meeting with a confidential informant who's watching the ring. He can't risk being followed. This is an industry worth $35 billion worldwide. The traffickers will protect their profits at any cost.
The stakes for everybody are really high on this operation. The people at the top of this chain, they've lost their humanity. I would love to see them behind bars. That's why I'm involved. This is crazy. It's the 21st century and we still got a lot of slavery going on. Hi everyone, I'm Steve Galster. I'm the founder of Freeland. Welcome to our panel called Facing Human Trafficking in 2020. We've got a great panel here today of some real experts on this issue, but I'm happy to say they're not just experts, they're people who are doing something about human trafficking. You saw a moment ago in the video the work that Freeland has done, and it included a little clip on sex trafficking. In fact, a lot of people think about sex trafficking when they think about human trafficking, and of course it's a huge problem, but there's a lot more to human trafficking than just sex trafficking. And today we have folks who know a lot about that, the other kinds of forced labor going on around the world. And unfortunately, some of that has to do with child trafficking. So today we have on our panel moderating, first of all, Len Morris, who is the director of the Children of Bal Ashram, which was our opening film at last year's Freeland Film Festival, a fantastic film about the work of a foundation in India called the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation, and the executive director of that foundation, Anjali Kochar, is here with us today. And we also have who's going to tell us about her work and how COVID-19 is also affecting trends in child trafficking, which should be very interesting and useful for us to know about. Also joining us today will be Nina Smith, who's the CEO of the Global Weave, which is an organization that is working to stop child labor in global supply chains. So as you saw a moment ago, so Freeland's really our vision is a world of free of wildlife trafficking and human slavery. And the film festival is partly brought together to create a platform for stories about these issues, what's really happening in the field. And these panels are designed to reflect on these documentaries to discuss what we can do about them. So I would like to now turn it over to the very capable hands of Len Morris to moderate this panel. Len, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I should mention that later in the panel also will be joined by Kailash Satyarthi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who is responsible really for this entire panel. I'll explain that a little later as we move forward. We're going to be taking a look today at modern slavery and trafficking, but the emphasis is going to be on children. We have in the world today over 40 million people who are trafficked. About 25% of that number, 10 million, are children. Of that number, about 2.2 million are involved in sex trafficking of the type you saw at the very beginning in the excerpt from Freeland. Ask yourself what actually is a slave. What would a modern slave look like? Imagine, if you can, a son or a daughter or a niece or a friend who has simply disappeared from all contact with the family, from all contact with the world. A slave is a person who has no control over their freedom of movement. They have no ability to decide whether they're coming or going. They've had their identity taken. They have no passports, no school records, no medical records. They have no telephones. They have no means of communication. They've been removed entirely to a distant location where they work at the whim of organized criminals, really, making products that we buy and that we use. They're cheated, they're lied, they're held captive, often in plain view. And we have human slavery, child slavery in every country in the world. And this includes the United States. Today, we have over 1 billion children who are missing one of the principal things you would need for a decent life: food, access to healthcare, access to education, sanitation, basic safety, basic human dignity. We also have about 152 million children working in this world, doing the work that often we would expect animals to do. Almost half of them, 80-some million, doing what we call the worst forms of child labor. That being work that endangers your physical safety, your health, and of course, your personal dignity. That's sort of the bad news. But the good news is that in the last 15 years, the world community, business, civil society, organizations, schools, organizations like Freeland have joined together, and we've cut the number of children in child labor by 100 million, by about 30%, which is really a remarkable achievement. And until the pandemic hit, our plans were to finish this human rights violation, this bane, to finish it off once and for all in the next couple of years. Obviously, we've kind of hit a tipping point with the impact of COVID-19. Millions of children, over 1 billion children actually, are home from school. The economy around the world is crushing, collapsing, and this is a very special time for us to consider the circumstances of all children, but trafficked children in particular, because they are at the absolute bottom. I think the last thing I'd want to add about trafficking is fairly obvious, but it's a crime. It's a crime anywhere it's committed. At its worst, particularly in the sex trafficking area, it's usually an organized crime, moving boys and girls from one country to the next. And with 1 billion children hungry, it's possible to use up a child slave and just simply get another. So moving forward into the program, I want to just give you a little background on why I'm here. In 2017, my wife, Georgia, and I were invited to go to make a film at Balashram in Rajasthan, India, by Kailash and Sumedha Satyarthi. Balashram was founded about 20 years ago by them, and it was designed as a place for them to bring and rescue and restore to life the young boys that they found when they conducted raids to free them from their trafficked circumstances. And over 40 years, they have liberated over 90,000 children, often at great personal risk. So it was really my first opportunity to go to India. And we went, and we were supposed to be there for about 9 days. I think we were there for about 2.5 months. We ended up filming a march across India that covered 11,000 kilometers, which was quite an amazing experience. And what I'd like to do right now is a way of advancing our panel and moving to some of our other fine panelists. I'd like to just show you the trailer to the movie, Children of Bal Ashram. And when we come back, we'll talk to Anjali about Balashram. She's spent far more time there than I have. So, trailer, please.
बालाश्रम में रहने वाले जितने भी बच्चे हैं वो कहीं ना कहीं किसी ना किसी तरह की विपत्ति के शिकार थे। उन्होंने अपने जीवन में बहुत तरह तरह के अत्याचार सहे हैं, चाहे वो हिंसा के नाम पर या काम के नाम पर या यौन अत्याचार के नाम पर भी। हमें तो ऐसे ऐसे अनुभव उनसे पता चले हैं कि हम सोच भी नहीं सकते थे कि बच्चों को इस तरह की, उनके बचपन में इस तरह के अत्याचार सहने पड़ते हैं।
$100 million young people should be the spokespersons, voices, and heroes for their 100 million left out sisters and brothers.
Go. So, Anjali, tell us a little bit, from your own perspective, of why these children at Bal Ashram, these boys, and there are girls mixed in there too, I can see. Tell us why they have such a special relationship to Kailash and Sumedha.
Thank you, Len. And before I answer, I just want to say thank you to you and to Steve and the organizers of the film festival, and to Nina for all of us, really inviting all of us to be here today to talk about this issue, because I think especially given the pandemic, this situation that really all of our children are facing, this child rights disaster is even more important for us to be talking about and educating ourselves on. So thank you. And to everybody watching, thank you so much for being here with us today. I think Bal Ashram is, I have to say, a magical place. It's this respite from the world where we are out in nature and truly with one another. The children that are at Bal Ashram, it is a place for them to recover, to find themselves after very traumatic experiences, and from Kailash and Sumedha's perspective, it is the fact that these children are their children, even though they are not biologically theirs, and this concept of all children are our children is really the belief that that they have in terms of of all of the world's children. And what they actually ask of all of us is to start looking at children through that lens of not yours and mine, but our. And the children that are at Balashram look to Kailash and Sumedha as their guardians, as you know, creating a place where love and laughter and joy abound, where they are going to school and getting the education that they need, but also the respect that each one of us, regardless of our age, really is entitled to. And so I think it is just this, for me, it is, I'll go back to that word, this magical place where children can truly find their childhood again.
Now, it's a bit of a hotbed, Balashram, because the children arrive broken,
Yep.
but over time, and you can see this happen very quickly. I saw it happen very quickly with children while I was there, while I was filming. They regain their power and their voice, and they really become instruments of the work that the Kailash Satyarthi Foundation, the 100 Million campaign, the Justice for Every Child campaign. Everywhere I look around the world, I recognize these familiar faces, some of them going back 20 years. How do these children factor into the work that you're doing, and what is the work that you are presently involved in to reduce child labor and also, obviously, child trafficking?
Yeah. So I think maybe I'll start with a little bit about the broader work, because I think that will bring us down to the first part of your question. The work of the foundation is really firmly rooted in Nobel Peace Laureate Kailash Satyarthi's 40 years of lessons learned, you know, on child rights. His work predates the UN Convention on the rights of the child, and as I think many, I know my Len and you and Nina and Steve know, as well as many of our audience members know, that the United States is the only country in the world that has not yet ratified this convention. But the work really to end violence against children, specifically on issues of child labor, slavery, and trafficking, really take on a very holistic and multidimensional approach. It is engaging policymakers, decision makers, elected officials on the need to have laws that are implemented and enforced. It is looking at work on the ground to really change what's happening at the very local grassroots level. And then third is really raising awareness. And so we see this work kind of, being done by the work recently done at the global level by Kailash through Laureates and Leaders for Children, engaging governments around the world to look at the non-health implications of COVID-19 on the world's most vulnerable children. And as you, Len, pointed out, those most vulnerable are children who have been trafficked, because they are not only then engaged in labor, forced labor, but secondly, they have been removed from any sort of social protection that they may have from their families or from their their communities. At a level, at a more national level in India, engaging with the Indian government on a new comprehensive trafficking bill, that just last week the Minister of Women and Child Development has said that, you know, the Indian government is now ready to move on this, which really could have some very meaningful implications for children. But at the very grassroots level, in terms of working, creating preventative models of child-friendly villages, where we work with communities to make them more resilient, to bring about village development, but at the same time empowering young people. And then really that empowerment of young people moving out from villages kind of globally through the 100 Million campaign, which is looking at young people learning about their rights, but then also standing up for the rights of their peers who have been denied some of those very basic rights. And so this kind of kind of addressing the issue at each of these different levels, and then taking it from localized communities broadly, globally, is part of the work of what the foundation is trying to do. And the 100, yeah, sorry.
So the 100 Million campaign,
Mm-hmm.
that is, Kailash describes that as the largest social movement in the history of the world.
Yep.
What he's talking about, baseline, is kids helping kids.
Yes.
Which
exactly.
means, among other things, that all of the children who watch this or who learn of this could go to the 100 Million campaign and learn what to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Len, you even mentioned this in a little bit just a few minutes ago, talking about the faces of some of these young people who you've now seen in different places throughout the world. The 100 Million campaign was inspired by survivors of child labor, of trafficking, of slavery. And their resilience, their transformation into these change agents in their communities. And so looking at 20 years of this kind of leadership of young people, and now taking it global through the 100 Million campaign. The campaign was launched by Kailash alongside 6,000 students in India. And today, the focus of the 100 Million campaign is justice for every child. It is this group of youth leaders who have come together to kind of outline the demands of this campaign, that are really saying, we as young people have a voice, and we have the responsibility to our peers to say and demand of governments certain things. And the campaign is really calling for $1 trillion of funding around COVID-19 relief to be really specifically allocated to the 20% of children globally who are living on less than $2 a day. And this campaign has now activities in 60+ countries, and is supported by youth-led organizations that represent over 1 billion young people around the world. And so for all of us, regardless of our age, but especially I think for young people, there is a place. You have a voice, and so we really invite you to join with with other young people making these demands.
So at the end of this panel today, we will be providing on screen the links to enable you to reach out to the organizations you're hearing from and learning about today, and make the connections that you need to make to learn more and become active advocates for children at this, at this very critical time. Because when we talk about justice for children, right now, unfortunately, justice for children is a conversation about food. It's a conversation about medicine. Of course, it's a conversation about education and getting on with becoming who they're capable of being in life. But it's also a conversation about basic security. We're fearful at this point that trafficking and sex slavery and forced labor and the worst forms of child labor will increase horribly because of the number of children who have increased vulnerability, because the world economy is collapsing, because the wealthy countries can dial up $8 trillion in quantitative easing, or the Federal Reserve or the central bank, but a child has no such economic advocate.
Yep.
So I'm going to thank you for now. We're going to go back to you, Anjali, but it's very important. I want to talk to Nina Smith right now, because if there's anything demonstrable at this point, at least for me, from the 25 years of filming children in child labor all over the world, the very best preventative from trafficked or forced labor, the best thing that we can do is to prevent it in the first place. And that is the model of the life's work of Nina Smith from Goodweave. Goodweave works in the carpet sector. They are broadening their work. They work in global supply chains. Over the last 25 years since Goodweave was founded as Rugmark at the time initially, they have helped significantly to reduce children in the Asian carpet sector by 80%. And that, along with that 100 million number that I threw out earlier, should be cause for encouragement. And also the fact that we're all here talking today, because trust me, 25 years ago, if you'd called a meeting of people to talk about 250 million children working like animals, there'd be no one at the meeting. The entire notion that we care about this, that we're all engaged in this, that you're watching and participating in this, indicates just how far we've come. And I think it's, I'm optimistic that we can still do this. This is a doable thing. It just requires the will. Nina, I'm going to turn things upside down a little bit and ask you to introduce your film, because nothing's more powerful than the voice of a survivor. And you have a beautiful film that you've made that I think would put a face on this problem for us and let us continue the conversation. Would you do that, please?
Sure thing. Thank you so much to all the panelists, to Steve and the festival for inviting me to be with you today and talk about this critical issue that my colleagues have really laid out quite clearly. Anjali, in describing Balashram, was describing an environment that I'm familiar with through one of Goodweave's transit homes in Kathmandu called Hamragar, our home. And the film that we're about to watch is about one of the more than 7,000 children we've directly rescued from servitude in the handmade carpet industry. Her name is Nirmala, and she does completely exemplify how, when given freedom, a child can do great things. And so I'll just leave it at that. I think the story speaks for itself, and welcome you to watch the film with us.
एक दिन राम्रोसँग खाना नै खान पाउँदैन थियो एक दिन खाना खाँदैन थियो कहिलेकाहीँ सँग गाउँकै साथीहरूसँग भागेर कारखानामा आएँ त्यहाँ आइसकेपछि मैले त्यहाँ लगभग 2 वर्षसम्म काम गरेँ होला तर मलाई त्यहाँ काम गरेको पैसा अहिलेसम्म मलाई दिएन त्यसपछि काम गर्दै जाँदाखेरि गलेचा बुन्दाखेरि हातहरू काट्थ्यो हात काट्दाखेरि हातको रगतहरू सबै गलेचामा लाग्थ्यो म त्यति बेला 10 वर्षको थिएँ त्यसपछि टाइम बित्दै जाँदाखेरि मलाई रकमार बुढी फाउन्डेसनको सर आएर लिएर जानुभयो मलाई ट्रान्जिट होममा र मलाई त्यहाँ पढाउनु भयो क्लास इन्ट्रोमा
म खास गरी गुडवीव लाइसेन्स प्राप्त गलैँचा कारखाना गलैँचा एक्सपोर्टरका सप्लायरहरूमा भेटिएका बालबालिकाहरू जो चाहिँ 16 वर्षभन्दा मुनिका हुन्छन् यदि तिनीहरू चाहिँ काम गरिरहेको अवस्थामा भेटियो भने अब उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ खाना लान बस्नदेखि लिएर शिक्षा स्वास्थ्य सबै सुविधाहरू उपलब्ध गराउँछन् अकस्मात चाहिँ अब उसको खुट्टामा जुत्ता पनि थिएन हातमा पिकी ब्याङ्क थियो र उसलाई चाहिँ ढाउ खोलेर भित्र ल्याएर राख्यौँ खालि अहिले उसलाई चाहिँ कसरी हँसाउने कसरी खेलाउने त्यतापट्टि ध्यान दिन 3 महिनापछि ऊ नर्मलमा आयो
सुरुमा फर्स्ट टाइम म ट्रान्जिट होममा जाँदा चाहिँ डर लागेको थियो र मैले क्लास 8 सम्म पुगेँ त्यसपछि म अहिले दसैँमा गएर मैले मम्मी बुवाले पनि मेरो कुरा बुझिदिनु भयो बुवा दाइले पनि मेरो कुरा बुझिदिनु भयो अहिले पढाइको कति महत्त्व छ भनेर र मैले आज एकदम खुसी छु के भन्न चाहन्छु भने मेरो स्टोरी चाहिँ सबैले थाहा पाइराखोस् र म के चाहन्छु भने मेरो जस्तो कथा स्टोरी कसैको लाइफमा पनि कसैको स्टुडेन्टहरूको लाइफमा पनि स्टोरी नदोहोरियोस् भन्न चाहन्छु म
Nina, the film with Nimala is very touching and very moving. It must be personally extremely rewarding for you to watch that. I'm sure you know her in all likelihood, because that's what happens when you start making these movies. But how does just explain to us, if you will, how the Goodweave model works? What's the idea behind it? And how can it help us help children like Nimala?
Thank you, Len. And I want to also acknowledge we've received a question from the audience about someone who's interested in knowing how they can avoid buying products made by trafficked children. So by talking about what we do, we'll begin to answer that question. And we welcome more questions along these lines, of course. So the thing that Goodweave's best known for is a little label with our logo on it that can be found on the back of a carpet or a rug. That means no child labor was used, whether it's trafficked child labor or other forms of child labor, in the making of a handmade carpet. And consumers can look for that label. It's individually numbered and traceable back to where that product was made. So what goes on behind that label? What does the label really mean? There are three main, we talk about three areas of work with Goodweave. We bring visibility to child labor, we stop abuse, and we address root causes. And we do that, our model, we say it's a market-driven model because it works when we can convince companies to work with us on this journey. And when we started 25 years ago, that was an impossible task. The corporate world was not tuned into these issues, weren't interested in having a level of accountability like the kind we bring. around their sourcing. And today it's a different story, which I'm really happy to talk about. So what we do is we partner with brands to investigate their full supply chain. And the reason that's important is because most manufacturing supply chains and other supply chains are quite complex. So, so what a company will do is potentially apply a code of good conduct to a factory, but many products, and especially rugs, and we can talk more about it later, are not really made in that factory. That factory outsources the order, it may get outsourced again, and the problem quickly becomes hidden. And in these hidden supply chains, that's where we find the majority of child labor. So we work to investigate that with, we have nearly 100 staff around the world on the ground in the communities where these products are being made. And they essentially map out the full manufacturing supply chain. And then we apply very strong criteria around child protection and worker protection in these sites. It might be a factory, it might be a small little loom shed in rural India, it might be someone's home where we get to. And then when we talk about stopping abuse, our teams are conducting random unannounced inspections in all of these locations. We may identify cases of child labor, in which case we immediately offer rescue and rehabilitation to those children. And at the same time, we're working to improve the capacity of the small to medium-sized producers around understanding what is child labor, how do you prevent child labor in your supply chain, how do you source responsibly? And there's really a deterrent effect to what we're doing on the ground, because when cases of child labor are found, and we work with some very big brands, the suppliers, the producers in country, in Nepal, India, Afghanistan, they can lose their business. So there's a real, I think what's interesting here is there's sort of a financial incentive for the change process to occur on the ground. And at the same time, in the third area, when we talk about addressing root causes, the change is driven in the community. So we work in the producer communities, we create child-friendly communities where all of the parents are engaged in the education of their children, where our local community facilitators work to ensure in these communities where the products are being made that children are going to school and not working, and that everyone in the community has a stake in that outcome. And it's really a transformative process. And when you marry the community-based change process up to the business practice change, you know, it really creates impact. And as you mentioned, Len, we've had a huge impact in the carpet industry in South Asia, reducing child labor by 80% from 1 million children when we began to less than 200,000 today. And we have about 180 brands around the world that we partner with. Some of them are quite big brands. I think our audience today is probably mostly American, and here, you know, you can walk into a Target store, into their home furnishing section, and buy products with this label. And, you know, it's a very concrete thing that anyone can do. And I will say on our website, there's a list of stores where people can source these products. I
have a quick question for you about that. Are there products beyond, and this is a question from our audience, does Goodweave label products other than carpets?
So yes, thank you for the question. We're now working more broadly in home textiles. We have a nascent program working in apparel supply chains. We aren't yet labeling the products, but that should be coming soon. And that's it. What we're doing is we have a team that's working on capacity building. So what we're really trying to do as an organization now is package up everything we've learned and partner with other organizations that are already working on labor rights issues in supply chains that are on the ground, so as not to create a giant infrastructure around this. We've had a partnership with a group called the Rainforest Alliance, showing them how they can apply our methodologies in tea estates in Assam, India, and we have some new projects coming online around that. So really what we're about right now is trying to push for the approaches that we've developed, whether it's in other supply chain organizations that are working on sustainability issues, or whether it's companies themselves and the ways they go about applying their own due diligence programs. So that's how we're trying to kind of go global, you know.
So companies in due diligence, companies that for many, many years, all they really wanted to do was inspect themselves and tell you after they'd looked at their own operation that everything was squeaky clean and just fine. Goodweave does not do that. The human rights model of Goodweave is you go in unannounced. I'm wondering, with that shift and the number of partners that you have and the marketing that you have created and the modeling that you have created, why is it that we still have companies that spend $2 billion a year on corporate responsibility programs? Why do we still have so much job labor? So much slave labor? Why are we in this position when we've traveled this far and people know what they know? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and you've began to answer it, I suppose, but you know, it's important for people to know. So the US government puts out a report every year called the List of Goods Made with Child Labor and Forced Labor, and there's 148 goods around the world coming from 76 countries. You can go and you can see what they are. And I would say, so it's complicated because some of this is coming from the local scenario where these products are being made and the challenges around law enforcement, and there's poverty and lack of education infrastructure. But I would say from my standpoint, when it comes to working in company supply chains where companies need to be responsible for protecting workers and especially children from making the goods that we buy and from enriching corporations, essentially, that the problem is often hidden, as you talked about in your introduction. And I would say the reason we're still facing this is because all those investments in CSR, about 500 million of which is estimated to be applied to worker rights issues, is being invested in the wrong way in the wrong places. So companies work, I would say, from a legal compliance standpoint. So they place an order in a factory, they have a code of conduct that they transfer to that factory owner, and they do an annual audit of that factory to see that they're complying. But as I mentioned before, often the products are not being made in that factory. In fact, that factory is outsourcing, and there's a super complex, opaque web that's going on underneath the factory where the products are actually being made. And it's a lot of work to bring that kind of visibility to that part of the supply chain, and to apply, yes, due diligence all the way there, and then to take responsibility for what's happening. And that's where the investments need to go, and to move away from this sort of box checking factory audit that never gets to the problem. And I would say that that's the main reason why we're still seeing this problem, especially in the global marketplace.
Well, you know, we have a viewer who has asked, you know, what it is they can do without getting in the way. And there really isn't, it's really impossible to get in the way. The subject's a complicated one. The more information you have and collect about what you buy, what you use, what you wear, what you eat. I mean, I want to remind everyone that we have child labor in the United States. We have 500,000 children working to pick our food supply. If you go into a supermarket and you shop, you are 100% likely to be coming home with something that a family, more often than not in this political climate, a demonized family, people of color have picked for our table. Steve, you had a question, a comment you wanted to make earlier to Nina about Goodweave and their work. I'll turn this to you right now.
Yeah, thanks, Len. Well, first, just to the bigger question, you know, despite the fact that there's all this money being spent on CSR, et cetera, why do we still have this problem, and why groups like Nina and Anjali's groups are so important? I think the big picture is that human trafficking is still much more rewarding than counter-human trafficking. You know, there's $150 billion a year being made on human slavery still, and the people who are trying to stop it don't have the same kind of incentives to do it. And I think where we've seen progress, which we're hearing from these two groups, is where the incentives have been put in place, disincentives also, and also the victim-centric approach. And that's why we were so interested in your film and learning about Balashram before. Here you're looking at people who listened to the victims. And as Anjali described before, that ashram is really a sanctuary. Our work, Freeland's work on this issue is investigative. We hunt the traffickers and we hunt their assets. And along the way, we meet groups like Anjali's who are providing sanctuary to these victims. And they're so important because these victims have no other place to go. I mean, there's corruption, there's apathy, etc. But the important thing is that people who run these sanctuaries they know what's going on in the human trafficking world. You listened to them when you made their film. Those kids talked about what happened to them, and that's where counter-human trafficking experts need to be getting their advice, is from the victims, and that's where it works. Also, along the way, we learned that you know, the supply chains are going to continue making a big buck unless they are incentivized to do it better, which is where Nina's group is so important. We can't all do that much research to figure out where to buy our shoes and pants, etc., and what's good and bad. Groups like hers can tell us, and that sends a signal back to the producers. Hey, we better do this the right way if we're going to make money, because the world's waking up to this. They're watching. So that's super important. And the final thing I'd say is we have to remember these human traffickers around the world, like I said, making $150 billion a year. And we're looking for money, all these practitioners, to protect the kids, to stop trafficking, to help the victims, to roll it back, to do the prevention programs. That money can come from the traffickers. And that's something that we're working on also in Congress and different parliaments around the world, is to pass new laws on restitution, by which governments can basically target the traffickers, not just arrest them, but take their assets away and convert that money, property, whatever it is, whatever assets, into human trafficking recovery funds for groups like the ones we're hearing about here today. So we can basically make the traffickers finance counter trafficking. Thank you.
Well, Rich, you've taken us to the subject of money, and really, frankly, all of the work that we're all engaged in, all of the work that I've witnessed over the years, you know, at the end of the day comes down to two things: political will, a decision by people, including the people in our audience, most especially the people in our audience, because it's noise and the attention of the public that tips the scale in favor of children over time. We've seen it happen. We've actually seen it happen. But it also takes money. And I made a film called The Same Heart about how we fund appeals for money at the international level. And it's basically the equivalent of passing the hat. And donors get tired. Countries get tired of putting money into the hat. And if there's been a tsunami and $250 million has gone to one place, there may be absolutely no money for another 6 months or a year for other appeals that are ongoing. Things like continuing needs, like food and access to education. So this seems like a perfect moment to bring Kailash Satyarthi forward and let him speak to us and share his insights with us. Most people would know Kailash as the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize winner from India, which in fact he is. Nina would know him as the founder of Goodweave when it was initially known as Rugmark. And correct me if I'm wrong, someone that you've worked for your entire life in the, your life's work, you've been joined to Kailash's vision from day one. Anjali works for Kailash at the Satyarthi Foundation in the United States, but also the 100 Million campaign. And basically, if you go to India, she's absolutely everywhere around Balashram and all of the activities of Kailash's movement worldwide. I know him, I've known him for a little over 20 years. For me, he was simply the first person I ever met, first world leader I ever met and interviewed, who just looked me in the eye and said, "There's no reason for us to have children working like animals. It is the worst moral blight. It's a blight on society and on humanity. It is something that we can eliminate in our lifetime and that we must eliminate in our lifetime." And I listened to that and I thought, wow, holy mackerel. And I still feel exactly the same way. But to him, to Kailash, he's a very humble man. To Kailash, he would simply say that he is the man that Sumedha reluctantly agreed to marry and of course work with. And she has been his partner for decades. He told me on one occasion that if she hadn't finally agreed to marry him, she would just be married to some other Nobel Prize winner, which I thought was very, very revealing. But in any case, and on a more serious note, it's not every day that you get a chance to introduce a friend, a mentor, and someone who's actually saved the lives of 90,000 children. But that is my honor today. So I give you Kailash Satyarthi.
My dear sisters and brothers, first of all, I would like to congratulate and thank my very dear friend Len Morris and his wife Georgia for this initiative. It's very unfortunate and disgraceful that today we are talking about human slavery. We are talking about buying and selling of boys and girls and men and women. Trafficking is one of the most illicit and lucrative trade today in the world. Many people, powerful people, are benefiting out of it. Dear friends, only yesterday I was talking to a group of young boys, 11, 12, 13-year-old boys. They were freed by my organization while they were being trafficked to work in factories. They were taken away from their home villages to the workplaces hundreds of miles away. One thing was very common. Every boy told me that due to this ongoing crisis of COVID pandemic, their parents, particularly their fathers, have lost their jobs, their traditional livelihoods. And that has forced them to go to work and earn some money. this is not just one case. This danger is looming. This danger of rise of human trafficking, and particularly child trafficking, is imminent if we don't act now with utmost political will and urgency. Last 2 days, on 9th and 10th of September, we had organized the Laureates and Leaders for Children Summit, what we call the Fair Share Summit. And it was quite revealing and rather challenging that when the rich countries have allocated $8 trillion for COVID relief measures, or what they call the COVID response fund, only 0.13% of it has been allocated for the poorest and the most needy marginalized people of the world. This is unacceptable. If we have to end this scourge of human trafficking, we have to have stringent laws in place and their compliances with a sense of deeper accountability and moral responsibility is needed. Adequate funds have to be made available. And that's why the laureates and leaders of the world called for fair share for children. And we are demanding that 20% of the COVID response fund should be allocated for 20% most marginalized children and their families of the world, so that we can prevent this danger and the risk of hundreds of thousands, or rather millions of children entering into slavery and trafficking, child labor. I call upon you to raise this voice, fair share for children, to stop human trafficking. Thank you so much.
So returning to our panel, I'd like to conclude by asking each panelist in turn for one recommendation, one thing of many that an audience member could do to become part of a movement to end human trafficking, slavery, child labor, and to make this world a better one for children in general. And I'll start with you, Anjali. One thing.
Oh, that's hard. Okay, one thing, maybe it'll be 1.5. Please, please, please talk about it. Talk about it, talk about it, and talk about it. You've learned a lot today, and Len's film, The Children of Bal Ashram, a film that came out last year, The Price of Free, will really give you the tools to be able to raise awareness, and go to 100 Million campaign and sign up, take the pledge, and become part of the Justice for Every Child campaign that we're running.
Steve, as our host and the founder of Freeland.org, what would be your recommendation? One thing.
One thing, write to your congressperson and ask them to set up a trafficking restitution fund. There's $150 billion a year made from human trafficking, another who knows how much from wildlife trafficking. All these traffickers are actually involved in various forms of trafficking. So that money that is seized from them by authorities can help finance recovery. It can go to victims, it can go to prevention programs. We don't need to raise it even from taxes. We can make the traffickers pay, but ask your congressman to set up trafficking restitution funds, and then we can lick this problem. Thank you.
Nina, I'll let you talk about what employers should do too if you want to, but our audience, what's your
Yeah,
name?
I mean, it's a no-brainer, especially because my fellow panelists have also given some great things that people can do. And, you can also speak with your actions and what you buy and what you don't buy. So I would just say, certainly look for the Goodweave label if you can find products that you need, especially now with COVID-19, and not only the producer communities, but businesses are struggling in this climate. And it's important we put our dollars behind the companies that are actually doing something to protect the world's children right now. So look for products with a Goodweave label. Do your research to find other products that are made responsibly, and also refuse to buy goods where a retailer or a brand can't tell you what they've done to ensure that the product you're buying is free from child labor and modern slavery.
For my turn, I would have to really agree, well, with all of the panelists. I love the fact, Steve, that you're going after the money. It's so about money. But I do think that we have a responsibility to know where our stuff comes from and how we're using our personal economy. And at Media Voices for Children, I would say that what we're interested in is giving people the tools to learn how to spend their volunteer time, how to spend their donor dollars, what companies to support, what products to avoid. So we've created a learning platform called learnchildrights.org. And if you're interested in screening children from Bal Ashram, that is free right now at learnchildrights.org. There's also a 7-part teacher's guide, study guide, filled with resources and links that includes every one of the organizations in this panel, among other things. But a way to equip yourself over time, really a reference. That's free for the next week. And there will be a card following our final very brief film that'll have all of these websites, so you can take out a pen and write them down in a hurry. I want to thank Freeland for this opportunity, all of the staff who worked really tirelessly to make this panel actually function. And I want to close with a very short film from the 100 Million campaign, which is called Justice for Every Child. And I think in about 1:30, you can understand why this is our day job and why we care about this and why we hope you will too. Thank you.